All right, welcome back to About Your House on Fox Sports Charlotte. So Ray's out, as I said last hour. He is on vacation, and we have Preston Sandlin filling in for him. That was a great first hour, by the way. I just want to give you some compliment there. Learned a lot that I didn't kind of know of. Just really when you're doing home inspections and, if you're putting in a new part in your home, what do you do first, There's a lot of stuff that you really don't think about. As someone that really has lived really at apartments and stuff, I think the same thing. I think more of when you want to do something at an apartment, you have to think about, okay, well, what can I do and what can't I do? There's a code.
Right.
It was the same thing with a house. So it's just one of those things where you don't really think about it until you're kind of like midway through the project, if that makes any sense.
Right.
So, Preston, it's great to have you here, and I'll let you set up the second hour for us. What are we going to talk about?
Building codes. That's awesome to roll into that and roll over, especially since, in our first segment, we talked about some of the improvements being finishing out a basement or an attic area, but you have to get building permits. You don't know how many times on the home inspection we run into, a finished basement or an attic that they didn't pull the permits. And we'll get into that and the problems associated with that. But first, I want to recap what we talked about the first hour. Was the improvements that the home improvements that fetch you or return you the most on resale. Kitchens, bathrooms, finishing out a basement, finishing out an attic, exterior, new door, landscaping, curb appeal, and there's a whole list on NAR, National Association of Realtors. You can go look at that. It's not my list; it's theirs. If you want to argue with it, argue with them. I argue with some of them, but certainly there are projects that are going to fetch you more, and it's a great time to do those because A, you get to enjoy it. B, it increases the value of your home, sometimes more than you're going to get in resale. So, I always say, why wouldn't, it's like buying a 65 Mustang.
Yeah.
I told my wife this. I was like, if I could buy a 65 Mustang totally restored, I could drive that thing for whatever amount of time, as long as I don't wreck it. And then I can sell it for more, because it's going to go up in value, than I paid for it. And I got to drive it that whole time. That's awesome. It's kind of like but versus buying a new car. You don't have any new car sponsors here, do you?
No, we don't.
They're getting ready to give us some angry emails. But you buy that new car, and it's great, but boy, does it go down in value.
Yeah. So unless you restore it or take care of it. No, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's more of you've got to make sure that if you're doing that, you gotta make sure that you're taking care of the engine, taking care of it. It's kind of like with your home. You got to make sure you're taking care of all the exterior as much as the interior of the house.
And it's going to go up in value.
Yep.
It's going to go up in value. That's the great thing about a house. I'm sort of old school, whatever. I don't believe in going in debt except for a house or something for business that will increase your business. Everything else depreciates. Well, obviously stock stuff. But if you're going to borrow money on something that appreciates.
Yeah. And
that's where John came in, and it's a great time because you can arbitrage those things. But let's get into building permits.
Okay.
Now, what I was saying, Stephen, is, all right, so obviously I'm a home inspector. When somebody wants to buy a house, you put your house up for sale, and, like you're going to buy a house. And you need to buy a house soon, Stephen. Start building that equity. I'm going to talk to you on the break. And, money's cheap right now. Do it, Stephen, do it. But Stephen buys a house. I'm going to go out and inspect it for him.
Okay.
So I'm like Stephen, this is great, whatever. But they've got this. They built on this addition on the back, and I'm not sure they pulled permits for it. We need to check that. So what I'd like to talk about is, all right, if they didn't build permits on it, what the problems could be.
Okay.
What do you think the problems could be? I'm gonna put you on the spot. If you bought a house with an addition, and they didn't have permits, and they should have.
So maybe on the foundation. And what I mean by foundation is like, so if they build something on the back, I'm guessing most of the time you're going to have to build brick or some kind of, like my parents built, I think, back in the early 2000s, they had a porch, and they made that porch an enclosed porch. So, added more, so less, got rid of all the wood, made, brick foundations, all of that. And then, added on to that. So I'm thinking maybe the foundations. I'm thinking also, what else? No, that wouldn't be a
insurance.
Okay, really? I would have never thought of that. Okay.
Well, let me give you a case in point. Let's say, heaven forbid, something bad happens, like your house burns down.
Okay.
And hopefully you're on vacation or something. But you go, the insurance, obviously you should pay for that, but then they find out you have an unpermitted addition.
Okay.
They could deny your claim.
Really?
Now, I'm not saying it's 100%, but they could. They could say, you had this unpermitted addition, and therefore, that's
about your house.
That's what caused your fire. Now,
hey, what's up,
you
Matt?
may be able to override that, but that is a possibility. Insurance is one thing. Another thing that could happen is it's possible that if you had this unpermitted addition, you have this additional square footage that they could go back and get you for back taxes, because you're supposed to pay taxes on the value or the square footage of your house, and for several years you didn't have that reported because it wasn't on there. So you got to get permits for additions, finishing out areas, basements and attics and that sort of thing. So I'm going to talk about that for a second.
I appreciate it, man.
So,
all right, thanks.
When is a permit necessary? Stephen, when do you think a permit is necessary? What would you guess?
I would think before you start, if you are doing that add-on or something like that, I would think before you start building it, you would want to get the permit codes and all that before you start doing it.
Right, absolutely. Well, let me go through it. First of all, anything, it used to be $5,000, but now they've changed it to $15,000. Number one, anything over $15,000.
Okay.
You have to get a permit.
So does that, I know you talked about add-ons. Does that include, pools and stuff like that? Does that also include building permits and all that?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, more than likely, if you build a pool, the people and there's going to be certain components within that pool, like you've got a heater, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The person who builds the pool is probably pretty familiar with that. We had a pool built, and there were certain permits they had to pull. But the general idea is anything over $15,000 or anything. It doesn't matter the amount of money if it alters or it repair or replacement of load-bearing structures. Like if I go in and do something, add some piers or something like that, or take out a wall, that is altering a load-bearing structure. So that's going to require a permit. And this is straight from a MEC permit. You can look that up. We also have a link on our website to all the different permit. Each county has their own permit department, but they're pretty similar. So the addition or repair, replacement of load-bearing structures is going to require a permit. The addition or change in the design of a plumbing system is going to require a permit. So if you wanted to add that bathroom, and we talked about in the first segment, but now if you are just changing something that's already there and you're not changing the structure or changing it, that's not going to require a permit. Like if you just change out a sink, that's not going to require a permit. But if you add another bathroom, you're altering the plumbing system. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
So just changing out what's already there, typically not going to require a permit. The addition, replacement, change in the design of a heating or air conditioning system. And so if you replace an air conditioning system, technically you're supposed to have a permit on that. And I have to tell you a story about this one, Stephen. I was involved in an inspection on a house, and I told them about the permit. They can check on our website. You can go and check all the permits on your house. It's basically a link to MEC permit. And then, we have a link to all the other ones, Stanley County, Union County, all that stuff. So they went on there and they checked it, and they had an open permit for HVAC that they had installed. So what had happened was they had a new HVAC installed, and they pulled the permit, but they never closed it. So it was an open permit, which was a problem. Fortunately, they were able to get the county back out there, and everything was okay. But they did run the risk of, if you got an open permit and you go to close that out, things may have changed. Codes may have changed since that time. So I recommend checking all the permits on your house.
Yeah, I was about to actually ask you about that, about how it's different from, county to county or, town to town. So, I live in Indian Trail.
Right.
I know the permits are probably completely different than it is in Charlotte, correct?
Yes and no. I would say they're probably about 99% the same.
Okay.
Most, there's a IRC, the International Residential Building Code, which is where most everything comes from. I'm trying to think of a good metaphor. I want to say the Bible, but that's a little strong. But there's and you can get this online, building code. But obviously, building codes in California are going to be different than building codes here because they've got to have, earthquake,
So mostly around the state, most of the codes should be around the same, right? But there might be like a a sub-article of this, or
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, we run into this when we do home inspections. We're inspecting the house, and again, most of the things are the same. But for us, certain codes were certain codes at certain years, and it's code now for you to have a carbon monoxide detector if you have any gas burning appliance or you have a connected garage to your house, which makes sense. If you think about that. And unfortunately, that horrible story years ago where down here by the practice fields, where somebody parked their car in, I think they fell asleep or something. It was cedar or something right by the practice fields. They fell asleep, the carbon monoxide, I think it killed like 4 people. So that's a code. But my point of this is that code came in later for Union County than it did for Mecklenburg.
Okay.
And, we called it out. And sure enough, they said, well, that wasn't code when this house was built. And they were right. But it is a good idea to, to update, especially with carbon monoxide detector, because that's a cheap thing to implement and, very safe.
Well, especially as someone who has lived in Union County and in Mecklenburg. I mean, you got to think about it, especially if you're buying like an old house in Charlotte. You got to think most of those houses, this is something that Ray has talked about many times in the past, but you got to think about really just the age of the house when it was built, because there's a lot of these areas that the house was built in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, and you got to think the building code was completely different than it is nowadays. So,
right.
And I don't think a lot of people think about that when they're buying the home, of what they have to look at with building permits.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're up against the break here, Stephen, but we still got a little more work to do on this.
We do. And I want to tell everybody, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
You're good.
Please call in at 704-227-8800, and we'll take your calls on anything really with home inspection, building permits, any questions you really have about that.
Home improvement projects that increase the value of your home.
Absolutely, yeah, and we'll be right back with more about your house.